Hello students, welcome to the lecture on the story of democracy, and after this lecture we will be able to learn the following objectives. Understand the nature of the Indian Constitution, discuss political organizations and their role in the democratic agendas, explain pressure groups and democratic parties, define Panchayati Raj and understand challenges of social transformation. Let us begin by understanding the uprising of nationalism. The British government formally took charge of India in the mid-19th century after displacing the British East India Company that had expanded its trade from 1757 to 1857. The year 1857 saw a significant uprising against the British rule. British colonial historians refer to this as the Great Mutiny, while the Indian historians call it the First War of Independence. Contrary to the popular belief that the uprising was a product of the pattern 1853 Enfield rifle, it was not the cause but might have been the catalyst. The underlying structural reason for the uprising was the penetration of India by British mores, customs, beliefs and cultural practices which were seen as a cultural assault on the Indian life. By the late 19th century, the emergence of Indian nationalism took place. Undoubtedly, the ideas of British nationalism were drawn from the Western world. It was given a voice by the finding of the Indian National Congress in 1885, where the elitist upper middle class and anglicized sought merely incremental changes. All they wanted was a notion of a representation. The Indian Constitution as an instrument of social change. Today we survive in a welfare state. It is a state that seeks to promote the prosperity and well-being of people. The directive principle lay down and strengthen the socio-economic goals. The preamble to the Constitution lays down the goals of socio-economic democracy for the citizens of India. The preamble emphasizes that India should be a socialist, secular, democratic republic based on social, economic and political justice. The directive principles therefore spell out in greater detail the goal of economic democracy, the socio-economic concept of political freedom. The Constitution is the custodian and guarantor of fundamental human rights and protector of human dignity, individual freedoms, sovereignty, integrity, liberty and unity of nation. The incorporation of a formal Declaration of Fundamental Rights in Part 3 and the directive principles of state policy of Part 4 of the Constitution are said to be the most distinguishing feature of a democratic polity. The law regulates the social interests, arbitrates conflicting claims and demands security of persons and property of the people, and is an essential function of the state. Therefore, law as a cornerstone of the edifice of order should meet the challenges confronting the society. The law and order to be legitimate and legal must also satisfy the mandates of the Constitution of India. Constitution precedents cannot be permitted to be transformed into weapons for defeating the hopes and aspirations of our teeming millions half-clad, half-starved and half-educated. The Constitution, unlike other acts, is intended to provide an enduring paramount law and a basic design of the structure and power of the state and rights and duties of the citizens to serve the society through a long lapse of ages. The intention of the Constitution is rather to outline principles than to engrave details. Thus, law should subserve social purpose. Judge must be a jurist endowed with the legislature's wisdom, historian's search for truth, prophet's vision and capacity to respond to the needs of the present, resilience to cope with the demands of the future, and to decide objectively, disengaging himself or herself from every personal influence or predilections. Therefore, the judges should adopt purposive interpretation of the dynamic concepts of the Constitution and the Act with its interpretive armory to articulate the felt necessities of the time. Political organization. Parties like Indian National Congress, Bharatiya Janata Party, Bahujan Samaj Party, Samajwadi Party, Communist Party, etc. are popular political parties that participate in elections all over India. Political parties that participate within one state are Shiv Sena in Maharashtra, Telugu Desam in Andhra Pradesh, Akali Dal in Punjab. Apart from these, there are parties with single charismatic leaders, coalition parties, independent candidates, and film actors who join the parties to increase its brand value. Pressure groups and democratic politics. The interest cause distinction is based on the purpose of the group in question. It therefore rejects the nature of the group's goals, the kinds of people who belong to it, and their motivation for joining. Interest groups, sometimes called sectional, protective, or functional groups, are groups that represent a particular section of society: workers, employers, consumers, an ethnic or religious group, and so on. Interest groups have the following features. They are concerned to protect or advance the interests of their members. Membership is limited to people in a particular occupation, career, or economic position. Members are motivated by material self-interest. Pressure groups seek to create influence through political parties and public opinion. Panchayati Raj and challenges of social transformation. The case for democratic decentralization is also predicated upon the notion that greater participation in local political affairs will improve the quality and reach of government services, particularly ones aimed at improving the lives of poor and politically marginal groups in society. For proponents of democratic decentralization, a central challenge of improving the delivery of public services becomes one of crafting institutions which can maximize participation in political life. In the context of poverty reduction, access to the resources and benefits that governments provide is associated with systems of governance that empower poor and vulnerable groups in society. Although there is of course great variation among cultures, countries and regions, we can identify a number of roles that governments typically play in poor and predominantly rural areas. One is the provision of public goods such as universal education and health care. Second is the provision of divisible goods such as irrigation, agricultural extension and credit. A third is the determination and enforcement of laws regulating key economic inputs such as land, labor and capital. Fourth and critical element is the recognition and protection of rights, allowing for organization, association and entitlement in the eyes of the state. Some of the necessary conditions for Panchayati Raj's effective working are strong political commitment from higher level authorities within government, relative autonomy of the local body in decision making and implementation of local schemes, the availability of internally generated resources at the local level. Elected bodies at local levels had adequate funds. They enjoyed substantive autonomy and lines of accountability existed between elected representatives and citizens and between non-elected bureaucrats and elected representatives. Caste, class and gender hierarchies have a crucial bearing on institutional processes and democratic practices. Participation in the Gram Sabha is affected by the apathy of the villagers. This indifference has its roots in the long historical background of non-participation in governance, entrenched with caste, class and gender hierarchies which are quite unparticipatory to say the least. The political culture promoted since independence has also been one of patronage, and it has certainly not encouraged the participation of people in institutional processes. Challenges faced in effective function of Panchayat Raj. Let us study the ways in which poor accountability and bad governance can undermine the interest of poor and marginal groups of the society. Rent-seeking behavior of police and government officials deprives the poor of their resources. Absenteeism, corruption and poor performance means government is spending social welfare resources yielding no benefits. The perception of corruption promotes feeling of distrust and affects collaboration between state and civil society organizations. A culture of corruption emerges when public sector officials encourage rent-seeking behavior and poor accountability. Let us now see what makes local institutions accountable. Firstly, an active citizenry who can counterbalance the arbitrary use of power by voting, campaigning, etc. Fiscal and political support from higher level authorities within government. The existence of competitive political parties. What are the necessary conditions for effective functioning of Panchayati Raj? We shall answer it by giving the following points. Political commitment from higher authorities. Autonomy of local body in decision making. Availability of internally generated resources. Existence of accountability between elected representatives and the citizens. Free and fair elections. Strong political parties and organizations. Accessible electronic media and grievance procedures. Let us study the ways in which state have retained control over the panchayats. Through the application of law, through the removal, dismissal and assessment of local functionaries, through cancellation of decisions or withholding of approvals, through administrative means, through control of fiscal powers and resources. Panchayat finances are classified into own resources, assigned revenues, grants and loans. Challenges of social transformation. Gram Sabha ensures direct democracy in rural areas, although the outcome has not been satisfactory. Low participation, class and gender biases, caste hierarchy have a bearing on democratic practices. Gram Sabha meetings can be fruitful only if there is awareness about the importance of participation. Gram Panchayats should be accountable to Gram Sabha. Let us know the milestones in Indian Panchayati Raj. 1882, the resolutions on local self-governments. 1907, the Royal Commission on Decentralization. 1948, constitutional debates on Gram Samaj. 1957, Balwanti Mehta Commission to implement Panchayati structure at district levels. 1963, K. Santhanam Committee recommended state Panchayati Raj finance corporations. 1978, Ashok Mehta Committee suggested the district to serve as the administrative unit in PRI structure. 1985, G.V.K. Rao Committee recommended that Block Development Office should assume broad powers of planning, implementing and monitoring. 1993, 73rd Amendment to the Indian Constitution recognizes Gram Panchayat as the formal democratic body at village level. 1996, the Adivasi Act powers of self-government are extended to tribal communities living in 5th scheduled areas. Summary. Now in the end, let us summarize what we have learnt in this lecture. The directive principle lay down and strengthen the socio-economic goals. There are two types of Indian political parties. national level parties, state level parties. Interest groups, sometimes called sectional, protective or functional groups, are groups that represent a particular section of society: workers, employers, consumers, an ethnic or religious group, and so on. Pressure groups create influence through political parties and public opinion. The 73rd Amendment to the Constitution formally recognized a third tier of government at the sub-state level, thereby creating the legal conditions for local self-rule or Panchayati Raj. At the village level, the most important provisions relating to participation and accountability are those governing reservations and the Gram Sabha. The ways in which state have retained control over the panchayats are through the application of law, through the removal, dismissal and assessment of local functionaries, through cancellation of decisions or withholding of approvals, through administrative means, through control of fiscal powers and resources. Panchayat finances are classified into own resources, assigned revenues, grants and loans.